Hello everyone, welcome to Painting Crafty, and today I'm going to be painting. I'm going to be showing you 3 ideas of how to create a carnation. Every month has a birthday flower, and the month of January is the carnation. So I'm going to show you a watercolor way you can create it, an acrylic paint way, and a mixed media version. I'm going to be putting them together and creating birthday cards, of course, for the month of January. So I'm excited to show you how you can take this flower idea and then create it in 3 different ways. Today I'm a part of a YouTube collaboration. It's the first of the month challenge, and today's theme is for the love of crafting. So everybody's going to be doing what they love to do. Today's collaboration has 2 hosts. We have Krista with Krista's Crafty Life and Brenda with Rustic and Lace DIY. Now you're going to find the links to their channels down inside of the description box, as well as a playlist for all of the other creators who have joined in today's collaboration. You're definitely going to want to take some time, check out what everyone's sharing today. I'm sure you're going to be inspired to create something. Well, let's get started. I'm going to show you, the first one I'm going to start with is the watercolor. So let's get started and I'll show you how I created it. For this watercolor project, I'm going to be using the Canson watercolor paper, which is considered as student grade, and then I'm just using the watercolor I have. I have a set of Paul Rubens colors, and I use it quite often. Watercolor will last you a long time. Just buy what you can afford and practice and see how your paper and your watercolor work together. You can see here I've already drawn my carnation shapes. I have 2 open flowers and 1 bud. It's nice to go ahead and do different directions when you're putting a composition together. One going one direction, another going another. It's just going to look a little bit more pleasing to the eye. For carnations, they have that ruffly bit of the tops on the flowers, so you can see me, I'm tapping up and down with just the tip of my brush. This round brush works perfect to create these little tap-tap motions. I'm going ahead and applying my watercolor on dry paper, and I'm just tapping it into my shape, making sure I'm leaving some open areas. Once I have my main area done, I come back in with just a little bit more of the same color, but more pigment this time and less water. When I tap that color on there, it's going to blend out and create those beautiful watercolor looks. This one, the flower is slightly facing the other direction. Again, it's nice to have a few different directions when you're painting flowers. I'm going to go ahead and do that tap-tap motion again and create my little form of my flower, and then come back in with just a little bit more darker pigment and tap that in on my already wet area. Watercolor has the interesting property of that wherever the paper is wet, that's where your color is going to flow. So as long as I keep my colors inside of there, they won't go past that shape I just painted. To create the stems and the little bud, I just mix up some green off to my side and I pull the colors. Often I'm pulling towards myself. It just makes it easier to create those thin line strokes if I'm pulling towards myself instead of away. I made that little tiny bud and then picked up a little bit darker color and added that to the bottom. Carnations do have a very distinctive part of the stem at the very top. It's rather wide and it's a little bit thicker, and then it comes to more of a point. Actually, if you just put that part onto the flower, it makes it look like a carnation. So even though the top kind of looks like a rose, kind of looks like a little bit of a peony, a whole bunch of different flowers, once you put that little part of that stem on, that thicker part right there, it automatically tells your eye it's a carnation. So sometimes just a small little detail can help the eye decide what type of flower it is. Here, where the junction of the flower is for a carnation, it has kind of a little bit of a nub, and then it has little leaves that come off of that area. So I'm putting that little junction area there and putting the nubs. They can also have just a few little tiny leaves up the stem as well, and you can add those on just to give it more of a carnation feel. To add just a little bit of background color to my piece, once my items are fairly dry on the front, I go ahead and I wash a little bit of color called yellow ochre in the background. I love the colors of the red, the pinks, and the yellows all together, and this is just going to add just a tiny bit of warmth to my background and add a little bit more interest. Now these colors haven't been on there very long, so when you're applying watercolor, when it's dry, it really isn't that permanent yet, so you want to be able to skate close to your things, move fast, turn your hand different directions, but don't spend a lot of time scrubbing next to where you added your flowers because you could actually lift the color by accident if you scrub too hard. Here I'm going ahead and giving a slight little flick of color to add a little bit of splash in the background. I used a Micron pen to add the lettering to my card. Micron pens are one of my favorite to use when I'm doing lettering or adding ink work to my watercolors, because once the ink is dry, it's permanent and it won't move around if you need to add water on top or when you clear coat your cards. It's the perfect pen to add details with. To finish off my card, I used some distressed ink in the color Black Soot to create a very pretty little black edge around my card. I love the way the ink sets into the edge of the paper, and it just creates a very pretty look to finish off these cards. To add just even a little bit more interest, I went ahead and took my Micron pen and I did a little bit of scribbling bit or adding some ink work to my watercolor. I really do enjoy scribbling and adding that loose quality to my watercolors, and the Micron pen and doing those loose motions adds to the quality, or at least I think anyway, to my paintings. You can always count your painting done. You don't have to add this step, but if you do, a number 01 Micron pen is the perfect size to add this little bit of scribbly bits to your painting. Up next is the acrylic version. I chose 2 shades of green. Tuscan red was my red color, and a white. I used the same shapes that I'd use for my watercolor, those oval shapes, and I'm actually using the same brush to create my acrylic versions. I went ahead and I put the brush, or use the red, load my brush first, and then side load with white. You go ahead and you push your brush down, give it a wiggle, which spreads out the bristles on your brush, and then you push it up or slide that brush to the top, and that's going to create that jagged edge. So again, here I put my brush down, give it a fan out my bristles, push it up, and it's going to create that little bit of a jagged edge on the top. So I'm loading it with red, slide loading with white, pushing down my brush, giving it a little wiggle to spread out the bristles, and then pushing it. I'm going to start with the back petals, and then I'm going to come in the front and start working around. It's kind of in a half moon shape or a crescent shape is what you're going to be layering your petals on. So again, it's just kind of general. Go ahead and load your brush, side load with white, push down, give it a jiggle, spread those bristles out, and then give it a push, and then bring back. It's kind of fun to do. You could also just go ahead and use white with a little bit of that pink on your brush. Change the color because your colors are mixing with the red and the white and changing it up. So here you can see I've already have that already done, and you can see how they look. I started with the same idea of one facing one direction, one going the other, and then now painting in that green stem, which is going to make sure your eye is saying, oh, it's a carnation. So it may not look exactly like a carnation on the top, but by adding that stem, it's going to tell your eye it's a carnation. I go ahead and add those little stems on the same way I did with the watercolor, creating that little nub where the 2 pieces come together, using the green just for the little bit of a bud, not adding any color to that. I'm keeping on using a dirty brush. You noticed I didn't really wash my brush out with my reds. I just go ahead and I wipe my brush out, not adding a lot of water, keeping my brush fairly dry, and my colors are mixed on my brush as I'm putting them down. So again, with my greens, I'm not washing my brush out. I'm just picking up my colors with that dirty brush, allowing the colors to mix together and creating that variegated look. To add a little bit more detail to the petals, I took some white and did little tiny strokes at the tips of the petals just to give it a little bit more structure. You could also go in with a little bit of the dark red if you need to add some darkness to your back petals to add a little bit more separation between the front and the back. To create the lettering, I used my Micron pen. This time I used kind of a faux calligraphy look. You create it by using a double line on any of the lines of your letters that are going downstrokes, and the upstrokes are single lines. To add the little bit of scribbly bits on this particular project, I chose to use my Kimberly 9XXB pencil. It's kind of like a charcoal pencil in a way. It has a very soft lead. I like to use it by twisting and pulling and pushing my lines. Again, I like that really loose line work, and this is a fun pencil to be able to create that little bit of loose line work on this acrylic painting. I also like to use, one of my favorite white pencils to use is a Sharpie China marker. It kind of works a little bit like a white crayon. It has a very soft color of white to it, and it's one of my favorite go-to white pencils. If you like to do mixed media, this is a perfect white pencil to use. I wanted to add another soft background to my painting, so this time I used a woody crayon pencil. Woody crayons are a water-soluble crayon. You'll still see some of your color crayon marks in the background, but you can get a soft watercolor look as well. So here you can see me adding the water and pushing and pulling my color, and it just makes for an interesting background on this little piece. I wanted to add some polka dots to my piece, and a Posca pen works perfect for this little polka dot application. I also added the ink to the edges of this piece as well, just to finish off the edge of my card. I'll show you in the end what it looks like. Up next is my mixed media final piece I'm going to create. I've already drawn the cake on there, and I wanted to go ahead and add a bright, colorful background. This fluorescent color pink is very translucent, but very brightly colored, and I love pink and orange combination together. In the end, you're not going to see very much of this background, so you're just going to have to trust the process on this step and see how it all progresses. Once that background was all dry, I went ahead and used a palette knife and these shades of blue and green and white to create the cake. When using a palette knife, you want to use thin layers of paint. You're not using a lot of paint when doing this, but you are kind of skating your knife across your surface gently. It's like kind of adding butter to a fresh piece of bread. You're not going to go heavy or heavy-handed with pressure. You're going to go light and create this texture look by adding thin layers on. When doing the cake, you want to make sure you're still seeing little peaks of that background coming through, little bits of surprises of color of that background. I'm going to set this aside and let it dry, but since I have all of this paint out, I'm going to use the extra bits on top of some paper to create some mixed media paper for myself. I have some dictionary paper, so if I have little bits of paint left over, I usually take the leftovers and go ahead and paint it on the paper. You never know when you might need it. For this project, I used it for the candles. So here I'm going to go ahead and make thin little candles, a little bit wonkily placed on my cake, and I used a glue stick to be able to go ahead and place my candles on. I'm going to be creating one big carnation for the top of my cake. So I'm going to be doing this in acrylic paint, and I'm going to be applying the paint exactly how I did my other ones, doing that where I'm pushing and then wiggling my brush to spread out the top to create that little bit of a ruffleness pattern on the top of my flower. I'm going to put them on the top, and then I'm going to bring them down a little bit onto the cake. By adding the flowers on top of the candles, it just looks like the candles are a part of the cake and not just sitting smack dab on the top. So it's a great way, put the candles on first and then put your flower. You can also use your palette knife to create straight lines. I go ahead and slide my palette knife through my paint and then use it up and down, rubbing it on my paper. I love the way it makes irregular lines. They're not super exact, and I love that little bit of wonkiness, especially to this piece. I use that same dark color. It's kind of a blackish blue-gray color. I'm not even for sure what the name of it was, but I didn't want so harsh as black at this stage. I'm going to build my dark colors up. So I started with this color, and then I work my way to a more darker shade of black. I'm using my brush for this step just to add the line work. I'm adding irregular thick and thin lines. I'm going to be adding another layer on top of this, so you're not going to see a lot of this. You're going to see some of the black, but you're going to have some irregular lines. So the brush works perfect to add this little bit thicker line work here. instead of just using my palette knife. Lots of different ways to add patterns: brush, palette knife, the end of your paintbrush. There's all different sorts of ways to add texture. Now, this is when I'm going to be adding the white to the background. A Posca pen is a great tool to use with this style of technique because it's going to be more scratchy. It's a little bit more semi-opaque. It's not all the way opaque. And I want to be able to go around my items but still leave little peaks of that color from the background and create this interesting look of the white over top of this colorful background. I'm going to need 2 layers using this Posca pen, so I'll go around and then let it dry, and I'll come back in and add another layer. But again, when I'm doing it, I want to make sure that I'm leaving little peaks of that color from the background showing through. Boy, it really has changed, hasn't it? From being that brightly colored piece to now having this white on the top. I went ahead and used my Micron pen to create the little wicks of the candles and then drew in little flames. I'm going to be using some more mixed media pens, and so this is just the beginning. These Jelly Roll pens are another favorite of mine. They come in these neon colors, and they are a great neon Jelly Roll. I use the pink, I have a orange one as well, and that's just going to add some finer detail marks to this little painting. It's all about the layering when it comes to mixed media. Sometimes people ask me, how do you know when you're done? Well, you just go until it makes your eye happy. Sometimes I let it set for a day or 2, and sometimes I add some more, and sometimes I just leave it the way it is. So it really is your personal judgment when you're putting these little mixed media pieces together. But they sure are a lot of fun. It's kind of like playing with paint. As a final little bit of touch for that flower, just to break up the red a little bit more, I used that brightly colored Jelly Roll pen in the pink and did some scribbly bits in the middle, and I thought it finished off that flower really well. I did add some ink, black ink, to the edge of this one too to finish off this piece. I'll show you in the end what it looks like. I use these Park Lane cards to attach my pieces to. I spray the backs with spray glue to attach them, and then I use a clear coat to make sure everything is locked down. Many of the mixed media items are not permanent, so you do need to clear coat your pieces. Well, let's see what they look like all finished. If you're new to my channel and you like doing art and crafts, come on over and see what I'm doing. I'd love to have more creative friends join me. I'd like to say a special thank you to Krista and Brenda for hosting today's collaboration. Make sure you check out the links to their channels inside of the description box, as well as click that playlist so you can see all the other creative ideas shared today. Well, thanks for hanging out with me today, and hopefully you'll come back and see me again. And next time you'll create right along with me.